Have you ever found yourself talking to your adult children and suddenly realized they're not truly listening anymore? Perhaps you notice their eyes drifting to their phones, or you hear polite but distant responses that leave you feeling unheard or, worse, irrelevant. You're not alone. This experience is painfully common, especially as our children grow into their own lives, forming opinions and priorities separate from ours. As parents, it's natural to feel deeply hurt, confused, or even rejected by this shift. After all, you spent years guiding, nurturing, and advising them. Your voice was their compass through countless decisions. Now, that voice seems quieter, less significant, and sometimes completely disregarded. But here's a gentle truth that I've come to understand through my own journey. Your worth and wisdom aren't diminished just because your children have stopped listening. The change isn't about losing respect or love. It's simply a reflection of life's natural progression, as painful as it may feel right now. In today's heartfelt conversation, we'll gently explore 5 essential reminders to hold close when your adult children seem to tune you out. These reminders won't erase the pain entirely, but they'll help you navigate this new chapter with dignity, grace, and a sense of inner peace. Together, we'll rediscover how acceptance, compassion, and gentle understanding can transform what feels like rejection into an opportunity for deeper growth and serenity. If you've ever felt silenced or dismissed by those you love most, please stay with me. You're not alone, and your feelings matter deeply. Let's take this gentle journey together and rediscover the peace you truly deserve. There's a quiet pain that many parents know but rarely talk about. It begins subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a soft shift in the wind. One day, your child asks for your advice on everything, from what job to take, to how to cook rice, to what to do when their heart is broken. You offer your thoughts, and they listen with wide eyes and open hearts. Your words matter. Your voice is their compass. Then, one day, something changes. You offer advice, and they smile politely, but don't really hear you. You speak with the same care you always have, but the response feels different now. Distant, dismissive, or sometimes nothing at all. The phone rings less. The conversations feel shorter. You begin to sense it, not in the words they say, but in what they don't say anymore. They've stopped listening, and it hurts more than you expected it to. If you felt this, please know you are not alone. This experience, this quiet grieving of a role that once defined your days, is one of the most universal and yet least spoken parts of aging. It sneaks up on us. It confuses us. And sometimes, it quietly breaks our hearts. But here's something I've learned after walking through that heartbreak myself and listening to many others who have done the same. This change, as painful as it feels, is not personal. It's natural. It's part of the rhythm of life. And when we stop resisting it and start understanding it, it can become not a source of suffering, but a doorway to something deeper. Let's pause here for a moment and look at it differently. Your child is not rejecting you. They are growing, stretching into their own identities, learning to carry the weight of their own choices. And just as you once taught them to walk, holding their tiny hands with pride, this too is part of that journey. Only now, you're teaching them how to walk through life without your constant direction. That doesn't mean they don't love you. It doesn't mean they don't respect you. But their priorities, their pace, and their perception of the world have shifted. They are building their own stories now. And sometimes, that means closing a few chapters with us in them, not out of malice, but necessity. I remember a man named Harold, an 82-year-old grandfather I once met at a small community library event. He was soft-spoken, with kind eyes and hands that trembled just slightly when he turned the pages of a worn notebook he carried with him everywhere. He told me about his daughter, Jennifer, and how they used to talk every evening when she was in her 20s. She'd call me after work, he said, eyes shining, even if it was just for 10 minutes. Every single day. But now, Jennifer had a family of her own, 3 kids, a demanding job, a mortgage, and when she did call, it was short, distracted, rushed. Harold told me, with a bittersweet smile, she's a good person, but she's not my little girl anymore. She's somebody's mother now. Then he paused and added, I used to think I did something wrong, that maybe I wasn't interesting to her anymore. But I realized, she's just busy being the person I raised her to be. What Harold said struck me deeply, because in that moment, He stopped seeing the change as something being taken from him and started seeing it as something he had helped build. Your child's independence, their confidence in making decisions without asking you first, is not a rejection of your value. It's the fruit of your parenting. It's what you hoped for, even if now it feels like a kind of loss. There's another layer to this too. Sometimes, when our children stop listening, it triggers something deeper within us. A fear of becoming invisible, of not mattering. And for many older adults, that fear is closely tied to aging itself. We worry we're being left behind, not just by our children, but by the world, that we're becoming irrelevant. But let me say this with as much tenderness and honesty as I can. You are not irrelevant. Your value does not decrease just because your audience has changed. The wisdom you carry, the experiences you've lived, the love you continue to offer, none of that is wasted. None of that becomes less important because your child no longer asks for your opinion every day. This is the moment to gently shift your identity, not to lose it, but to evolve it. You are still a parent, but now you are something more, a quiet presence, a safe place, a steady light. This shift is not about being less. It's about becoming something new. It's about learning how to love without needing to be heard all the time. It's about learning how to give, even when your gift isn't acknowledged. It's about sitting in the background sometimes, not because you've been pushed there, but because you've chosen to give your child space to lead their own life, the same way you once led yours. This doesn't mean you never speak. It doesn't mean you stop caring, but it means you speak with the wisdom of timing. You wait until they ask, or if they don't ask, you offer softly, with no expectation of being followed, just the quiet satisfaction of having said your truth. I know this is not easy. Sometimes you'll want to shout, to say, "Why don't you ever listen to me anymore?" And sometimes it may be necessary to say that. But most days, the deeper peace comes not from changing your child, but from changing your expectations. Let go, not of love, but of the need to be needed in the same way you once were. Let go, not of your voice, but of the insistence that it be heard every time you speak. Let go, not of your role as a parent, but of the belief that your child must still need guidance in the way they once did. Instead, embrace the quiet. Fill it not with resentment, but with grace. Sit beside your child, not as their guide, but as their equal. Listen as much as you speak. Offer advice like a gift, not a requirement. And when they don't take it, smile anyway. Trust that the roots you planted are still there, even if the tree now grows in a direction you didn't expect. Your love, your wisdom, your presence, they are still needed, just in a different form. Let that be enough. Let that be beautiful. There's something quietly devastating about pouring your heart into someone for decades, only to feel as though they no longer see you. You spent years waking in the middle of the night when they were sick. You worked through exhaustion to provide for them. You stood by them during heartbreaks, bad grades, and lost jobs. And yet now, when you speak, your words barely seem to land. They may nod, they may smile, but deep down, you feel it, the space between you widening. Your advice is met with silence. Your experience is brushed aside. Your attempts to help are misunderstood as interference. And a part of you begins to wonder, do I even matter anymore? This is where so many parents carry quiet pain, not because their children have stopped loving them, but because they've stopped seeking them. And in that absence of being needed, something inside feels like it begins to fade. But here's what I want to remind you of, gently, and with all the compassion I can offer. Your worth is not tied to how often your children seek your advice. It is not measured by how much they agree with you. It is not defined by whether they still look to you as their guide. Your worth has never depended on their approval. It never needed their validation to be real. You were worthy when you were changing diapers in the middle of the night, wondering if you were doing it right. You were worthy when you stood in a kitchen preparing meals with a tired back and a heavy heart. You were worthy when you gave your children space to make mistakes, even when it scared you. And you are worthy now, sitting in the quiet of your own home, even if your phone hasn't rung today. The truth is, many of us unconsciously tie our identity and our sense of value to how much we are needed. Especially in parenthood, where being there becomes second nature. It's easy to confuse being useful with being worthy. But usefulness fades. Roles shift. Children grow up. They stop needing rides, lunch money, daily advice. They find new voices to listen to, new homes to call their own. And if we're not careful, we start thinking we've somehow become less. But you are not less. You are simply standing in a different light now. You are not the center of their world, and that's okay, because you are still the foundation. You are still the soil in which they grew. I once met a woman named Lena who had 4 grown children, each living in a different city. She had been the glue of their family, the kind of mother who remembered every birthday, every favorite meal, every small detail. But in recent years, she noticed something that unsettled her deeply. Her children stopped asking for her opinion. At first, she was heartbroken. She had always been the one they turned to. But now, they made decisions without telling her. They faced struggles she only heard about after the fact, if at all. One day, Lena said to me, "It's like I became invisible." I asked her what made her feel that way. She paused, then said something I'll never forget. "I guess I just miss feeling important." And there it was. That aching, universal longing. Not to control, not to interfere, just to be important. If you felt this too, I want to remind you, you are important. Even if your children don't show it in the ways they once did. Even if your advice goes unheard, your calls go unanswered, or your presence seems like an afterthought, you are still the thread in the fabric of their lives. Quiet maybe, but never insignificant. Lena decided, gently and intentionally, to stop measuring her value by her children's responses. Instead, she asked herself, what do I value in me? She revisited passions that had long been buried: watercolor painting, journaling, and volunteering at a nearby animal shelter. She reconnected with friends she had lost touch with. Slowly, she started to feel full, not because her children returned to her more often, but because she returned to herself. That's what this part of the journey is about. Not reclaiming your role in their lives, but reclaiming your place in your own. You are not just someone's parent. You are not just someone's backup advisor. You are not just there if they need you. You are still a whole person, a rich story, a living, breathing soul with wisdom, humor, tenderness, complexity, and endless capacity. And this season of your life, it is not a waiting room for their attention. It is not a slow fade into the background. It is a time to remember that you, yourself, are enough. There is a special kind of strength that comes from being content without recognition, from giving love without expecting return, from knowing who you are without needing someone else to remind you. Does it mean you stop caring? Of course not. Does it mean you stop wishing to be closer? No. That desire is real, and it matters. But it does mean you stop tying your happiness to whether or not your children see you in the same light they once did. Because you shine just as brightly, even if they've stopped looking in your direction. It's okay to feel pain when your voice is no longer sought. It's okay to grieve the role you once held. But then, let yourself be free. Free to become someone more than what they see. Free to return to your own heart. Free to be joyful without permission. And maybe, just maybe, when you stop needing their approval, you'll notice something quietly beautiful. They'll start listening again. Not because you asked, not because you demanded, but because they sense something in you that is calm, content, whole. Because nothing draws people in like someone who has made peace with themselves. Your worth is not conditional. Not on being asked, not on being agreed with, not even on being thanked. Your worth is steady, quiet, and entirely yours. And the most powerful thing you can do now is live in that truth, with grace, with dignity, and with the deep knowing that you were never less than. Not then, not now, not ever. There is a kind of love so strong, so deep, that it wants to protect, guide, and hold on forever. It's the kind of love that parents know all too well. The love that stayed up all night when their child had a fever, that drove across town to deliver a forgotten school project, that ached with worry when the child walked into adulthood's uncertain world. But what happens when that love, no matter how sincere, begins to feel unwelcome? When the advice you offer is ignored? When the concern you express is seen as criticism? When your effort to help is met not with gratitude, but with distance? This is where many parents struggle, not with love itself, but with what it means to love in a new way. A quieter way. A way without control. You see, for most of your life as a parent, love and responsibility were intertwined. You loved them, so you fed them, bathed them, taught them, protected them. You guided their decisions because they needed that guidance to survive. And in doing so, your identity as a parent became deeply linked to being in charge, to being the one who knows best, to being the one who leads. And then, one day, without warning, everything changes. Your children grow up. They build their own lives, their own homes, their own routines. They start making decisions you would never make, living lives you may not fully understand, and drifting into worlds you're no longer at the center of. And you, with all your wisdom, love, and experience, suddenly find yourself on the sidelines. It's jarring, it's painful, and it can feel like rejection. But what if I told you that this moment, this painful letting go, is actually one of the purest expressions of love you will ever offer? To love without control is one of the hardest lessons life will ever ask of you. I once knew a woman named Miriam, a devoted mother of two. Her son, Daniel, had always been close to her, calling every evening during college, asking for advice on everything from cooking to relationships. But as he entered his 30s and became a father himself, something shifted. Miriam found herself watching from afar as Daniel made decisions she didn't agree with, how he raised his kids, how he handled his finances, even how he treated his own health. She worried constantly, and so, as mothers often do, she offered her thoughts. Gently at first, then more urgently. You need to take better care of yourself. That job isn't stable. Don't let the kids spend so much time on screens. But instead of drawing closer, Daniel began to pull away. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became less frequent. Miriam felt confused, hurt, rejected. Her love hadn't changed, so why was it being pushed away? One day, during a particularly quiet afternoon, Miriam sat alone at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea. And something clicked. She realized that her son didn't need her to fix things anymore. He needed her to trust him, even if he made mistakes, even if she disagreed, even if his way wasn't her way. That was the moment Miriam began to understand what it means to let go with love. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging to the belief that love must look like control. Because control, even when well-intentioned, can feel like mistrust. It can sound like criticism. It can push away the very people you're trying to protect. And so, Miriam did something incredibly difficult. She stopped offering advice unless asked. She stopped expressing disapproval with raised eyebrows or silence. Instead, she began to simply listen, to truly listen. And slowly, something shifted. Daniel started to open up again. He began to call more, not because he needed direction, but because he missed the warmth of his mother's presence. The relationship began to heal, not because Miriam held tighter, but because she let go. This, my dear friend, is the art of loving without controlling, showing up without agenda, listening without judgment, and trusting that the love you planted will continue to grow, even when it doesn't look the way you expected. It takes strength, it takes humility, and above all, it takes trust. Trust in your children and trust in yourself. Letting go is not about absence. It's about presence. Quiet, grounded, non-interfering presence. The kind that says, I'm here if you need me, but I believe in you, even when you don't follow my path. Love without control also means releasing the illusion that your way is the only right way. It means recognizing that your children are not extensions of you. They are their own people, with their own journeys, their own fears, and their own lessons to learn. Yes, they may struggle. Yes, they may stumble. And yes, it will break your heart to watch them hurt. But their pain is not always yours to prevent. Sometimes, it's theirs to grow through. And in those moments, your greatest gift is not a solution. It's your presence. Your quiet, unwavering, judgment-free presence. Sometimes the most loving thing you can say is not, let me tell you what to do, but I trust you. I believe in you. And I'm always here. I know this isn't easy. It goes against every instinct we've developed as caregivers. We want to fix. We want to prevent. We want to step in. But this part of the journey asks us to step back. Not in apathy, but in love. To create space. To offer trust. To be a sanctuary, not a supervisor. When you choose to love without controlling, you give your children the freedom to return, not out of obligation, but out of love. Not because they have to, but because they want to. And when they do, the relationship that grows will be rooted not in dependency, but in mutual respect. So if you find yourself wanting to intervene, to correct, to fix, pause, breathe, ask yourself, is this love or is this fear wearing the mask of love? Let your love be brave enough to step aside. Let your presence be steady enough to hold space. Let your trust be deep enough to say, even if you fall, I believe you will rise. This is not weakness. This is strength. This is the kind of love that lasts, the kind that grows, the kind that welcomes, even after distance. Because the truth is, letting go isn't the end of your role, it's the evolution of it. And your presence, even in silence, can be the most powerful message of all. I love you. I trust you. I'm still here. There is a quiet, aching moment that visits many of us as we age, a realization that life has gone on without us at the center. The calls come less frequently. The visits are shorter. The questions we once answered so confidently are now directed elsewhere, or not at all. And in the quiet that follows, we ask ourselves questions that cut deeper than we expect. Do I still matter? Where do I belong now? Is there anything left for me, apart from being a parent? It's in this space, this silence, this longing, that many people feel their lives begin to shrink. Days blur together. The heart feels a little heavier. Joy feels further away. And it can be easy, so easy, to let this feeling take root, to believe that without our children's attention, validation, or presence, our own lives have somehow become less. But I want to tell you something. Something that perhaps you haven't heard in a long time, and something you deeply deserve to hear. Your life is still yours, and it is still full of meaning, full of beauty, and full of potential, whether they see it or not. The love you gave to your children will always be a part of you. Nothing can take that away. But your identity does not end with motherhood or fatherhood. It doesn't end when the last child moves out. It doesn't end when the phone stops ringing. And it certainly doesn't end when your voice is no longer the loudest in their lives. Because beneath the role of parent is someone who is still alive. Someone who once had dreams, hobbies, passions, and curiosities that had nothing to do with raising children. And maybe, just maybe, this chapter, this unexpected, quiet, lonely chapter, is your invitation to return to that self. I want to share with you the story of Robert, a retired teacher in his late 70s who had spent his entire adult life caring for others, his students, his wife, his children. He had been the kind of father who attended every school play, built tree houses on weekends, and made Sunday pancakes a family ritual. He loved being needed. But once his children grew up and started their own families, Robert noticed that his days began to feel strangely hollow. He didn't know what to do with himself. He wandered from room to room, feeling like a ghost in his own home. "They used to need me every day," he once said to me. "Now I feel like a footnote in their lives." It wasn't bitterness in his voice, it was grief. Until one day, something shifted. Robert was out walking in the park when he heard a busker playing a familiar melody, a song he used to play on the piano when he was young. He stopped in his tracks. That tune, once so familiar, stirred something long dormant inside him. The next week, Robert dusted off the old keyboard he'd stored in the attic. His fingers were stiff. The notes weren't perfect, but for the first time in years, he felt alive. He began practicing every morning, just for himself. No audience, no applause, just music and memory, meeting in the quiet of his home. That one moment led to others. He started volunteering at the local community center, teaching music to children. He joined a reading group at the library. He even began writing little reflections in a journal each night, something he'd never done before. And then he said something I'll never forget. "I thought my story was over because they stopped listening. But the truth is, I was just waiting for myself to come home." You see, we give so much of ourselves as parents that we sometimes forget we were whole people before we ever had children. And we are still whole now. Yes, maybe our purpose looks different. Yes, maybe our days are quieter. But that doesn't mean they're empty. Your life is not on pause, waiting for someone to call. It is still happening, right now, in every sunrise, in every breath, in every choice you make about how to spend this day. What books would you still like to read? What places have you not yet seen? Even if just the park around the corner. What skills have you tucked away, convinced you were too old to return to them? What conversations are still waiting to be had? With neighbors, with new friends, with yourself? You don't need your children's attention to begin again. You don't need anyone's permission to rediscover your joy. You simply need to remember, you still matter to this world, to this moment, and most importantly, to yourself. This is your life. And while it may no longer be centered around caring for others, it can now be centered around caring for you. This isn't selfish. This isn't indulgent. This is healing. This is wholeness. This is freedom. There is so much waiting for you beyond the boundaries of your role as a parent. There are stories you haven't told yet, recipes you haven't cooked, music you haven't danced to, friendships you haven't explored. There is laughter you haven't heard in a long time. And yes, it can still come from your own mouth. Don't let the silence from your children convince you that your life is silent too. You still have something to say. You still have something to feel. You still have something to become. It's okay to miss them. It's okay to hope they'll call more, visit more, listen more. Those feelings are real and valid. But don't make your joy conditional on their attention. Choose life now. Choose your own presence now. Choose to open the window, breathe the morning air, and say, this life is mine too. Let your days be filled with purpose again, even if no one else sees it. Let your heart stretch open, not to fill someone else's need, but to meet your own. Because you are not done. And whether your children notice or not, you are still becoming, still living, still radiant with all the wisdom and warmth this world desperately needs. Live your life fully, not as a parent waiting to be needed again, but as a soul rediscovering its place in the world. There's a truth about life that most of us don't fully understand until we've lived through it. People rarely understand the value of your words in the moment you say them. Sometimes it takes years, decades even, for someone to circle back and realize, you were right. You were wise. You saw something I couldn't. And so often, that someone is your child. Maybe you've spent years giving advice, sometimes gently, sometimes firmly. You told them what to watch out for in relationships. You warned them about rushing into things. You taught them the value of hard work, of patience, of integrity. You tried to guide them, not to control them, but because you had lived through enough to know better. But they didn't always listen. Sometimes they rolled their eyes. Sometimes they snapped back. Sometimes they drifted away entirely, convinced that they knew better, that your ways were old-fashioned, that you just didn't understand the world they lived in. And you were left in the quiet, holding your wisdom like an unopened letter, full of truth, but unread. It hurts, not because you need to be right, but because you care, because you've seen what happens when someone walks a path blindly, because you wanted to spare them pain. And instead, they shut the door, sometimes even turning your care into a burden. But here is the gentle, freeing truth. Time has a way of teaching what words never could. Your children may not hear you now, but life will echo your voice back to them in time. There is a man named Elias, now 83 years old, who once told me about his daughter, Clara. When she was in her 20s, she fell in love quickly and married even faster. Elias was worried, not because he didn't want her to be happy, but because he saw signs she didn't. The relationship was rushed, unstable. He spoke up, once, twice, and then stopped, when he saw that every word was pushing her further away. Years passed. The marriage became strained. Clara pulled back from everyone, including her father. She rarely visited. Elias watched quietly, aching for her, praying that she would find her own way. And one day, out of the blue, Clara came home. Not just physically, but emotionally. She sat with him on the porch, where they'd once had long conversations over lemonade and summer air, and she simply said, I know you tried to tell me. I just couldn't hear it back then. But you were right. Elias didn't gloat. He didn't say, I told you so. He just took her hand in his, smiled softly, and said, I've been right about many things. And I've also been wrong. What matters is that you found your way back. That story has stayed with me because it holds a truth that every parent needs to hear. Your wisdom is not wasted, even when it's not received right away. It's stored, somewhere deep inside your child's heart. Your words are waiting for the right moment, for the right life experience to bring them to the surface. And when they do, they'll be a lifeline, something steady to hold on to when everything else feels uncertain. So be patient, not just with your children, but with the timeline of life. Be patient when your calls go unanswered. Be patient when your advice is brushed aside. Be patient when your presence feels more tolerated than welcomed. Because patience is more than passive waiting, it's active trust. It's saying, even if you don't see me now, I will still be here. Even if you don't hear me now, I will still speak with kindness. And while you wait, stay open. Stay open to the small moments, those passing smiles, those brief check-ins, those quiet indicators that the bond is still there, even if it feels frayed. Stay open to reconciliation. Stay open to being surprised. Stay open to the idea that your relationship with your child can evolve, not into what it once was, but into something new, something perhaps even deeper. Sometimes, the door you thought was closed forever creaks open with time, not because you pushed, but because you waited with grace. Let your child come back on their own terms. Let your wisdom be there when they're ready. Let your love be the thing that never left. Because when all is said and done, what your child will remember most is not whether you were right, but whether you remained kind. They will remember how you made them feel. They will remember that you didn't force your way into their lives, but that you kept the porch light on, gently waiting for them to come home. Your love, steady and unconditional, will be the compass they return to when they are lost, when they are broken, when they are ready. And even if that moment never comes the way you imagined, let your heart be at peace knowing this. You loved well. You stood with grace. You spoke with care. You gave them the space to grow, even if it meant growing away from you for a while. Time is a teacher, and sometimes it's the only one your child will hear. So speak your truth with gentleness. Let go of the need to be heard right now, and trust, with a deep breath and a quiet heart, that love and wisdom always find their way home. If you've made it here with me, through the grief of being unheard, the ache of letting go, and the quiet rediscovery of your own worth, I want to tell you something simple but deeply important. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are not less than because your children no longer turn to you the way they once did. You are still you, and that is more than enough. It's easy to believe that being a parent means always being central in your child's life. But life, in its own quiet wisdom, shows us otherwise. It moves, it shifts, it teaches both you and them to evolve. And as painful as it may be to watch the distance grow, that very space can become fertile ground for something new, a deeper kind of love, not based on dependence, but on mutual respect. You've learned now that you don't need their approval to feel valuable. You don't need to be listened to in order to be wise. And you certainly don't need to be needed in order to live a full and meaningful life. Let their distance be an invitation, not to withdraw, but to gently return home, to yourself. You are still a source of love, of warmth, of insight. Whether they see it today, tomorrow, or never, does not erase the truth of what you carry. So light a candle in your quiet space. Make your favorite cup of tea. Breathe deeply into the life that is still yours. Create beauty. Tend to peace. Share laughter with those who do listen, even if that person, today, is only you. And most of all, remind yourself gently, every single day, my voice still matters. My life still matters. I still matter. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this video brought you comfort, I hope you'll stay. Share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear your story. And if you know someone who feels the ache of being unheard, share this with them. We heal better, together. Until next time, may your days be soft, your heart steady, and your peace unshakable.